Okay, y'all. So welcome back to the Pilipinx-American Stories Podcast. I am your host, Alfredo, and we here at the podcast want to better understand aspects of the Filipinx-American diaspora. We cover topics such as, but are not limited to, history, community, and Filipinx-American culture. And for today's guest, we have a really good friend of mine who I've been doing community work for about like how many years with? About two, right, Natalie? So two years now.
Yeah, 2 years now.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of nonprofit work for like the past 2 years and everything, and then yeah, we're actually going to be going into this topic of like community organizing in terms of us being the new gen and everything. So, but before that, um, what other kind of like organizing work have you been doing like the past like few years before we go into like your whole origin thing so that people get a grasp of like what you do in the community?
Oh no, yeah, for sure. Hi everybody, Natalie Ricasa Bagaporo. A lot of community members know me as Noodle. I born and raised in Bonita, California. That's here in San Diego. I currently live in South San Diego, and I work over at San Diego State with Associated Students. What have I been up to in the past couple of years? So, in the past couple of years, I found myself involved in both local and national organizations that have to do with the Filipino community. Currently serving as co president of UniPro San Diego. Shout out UniPro San Diego. Shout out Ali Zamora, my co president. I'm also doing work with the Filipino Alumni Association, UCLA. I do work with student engagement, and we're hoping to do some expanding work with Filipino studies. I am affiliated with the Employee Resource Group at San Diego State University. We're called Bayanihan. We're looking to expand our work this year, especially with the virtual campus. My focus there is also student engagement and the Filipino studies concentration. Um, I'm involved with EPIC. EPIC is empowering Filipino youth through collaboration. It's a program that was co-created by UniPro and NAFA, and NAFA now has it as their ambassador program. I'm finishing up my term as a coach. I also spent a year as an ambassador and a representative from the San Diego region. Geez, where else are we going? I think a lot of my organizing has been tied to place. So a lot of it has to do with serving or representing San Diego. I've had very brief involvements with CAMP, the Kuya Ate mentorship program, which Alfredo is familiar with. And I'm also still tied to serving my community at UCLA since that's how I really got involved with serving the Filipino community as a whole. So that's what I've been up to in the past 2 years, really I think looking for my identity outside of the college space as far as that relates to serving community, but still very much interested in higher education and now specifically student affairs. That's where my professional journey has taken me and also my academic journey as a return to graduate school at San Diego State University in their post secondary educational leadership program with an emphasis in student affairs. So whew, mouthful, but that's where I've been. That's what I've been up to in recent years.
Okay, so before we go on to essentially the bulk of what we're going to be talking about, so the main things that we're going to be covering is how we both got started doing community work. We're also going to be focusing on what it's like navigating this kind of community work, community organizing space as like the younger people, specifically people in like the millennial slash Gen Z kind of like era and everything. But I mean, you have this, it's go before like I go into it, like it's kind of like wild hearing you say this because I know what you do, but then like when you actually say what you're doing, it's like I forgot that you do like a lot of this stuff, and it's just like, wait, what?
Oh, honestly, I know. I think something that was told to me, you might know her, Christy Kiyogi. She was mentored by my mom, and then she's actually mentored me in my professional and academic capacity as well. She always reminds me to park the car and enjoy the view, and I think the reflection periods that I have, they're too far in between reflecting, and especially now as I'm starting grad school, this is our first week. Um, I need to kind of take a step back and reassess the things that I've committed to. But when I do talk about what I've done in my short 24 years of life now, yay Virgos, um, I feel like I've been doing quite a bit for myself. And so I'm excited to say that that is a product of people who have influenced me and helped guide me on this journey and open a lot of doors for me.
Well, I mean, since you're saying that, I mean, like you're obviously doing like a whole bunch of this stuff and everything, but like yeah, sure, we could talk about like what you're doing now, but we kind of have to talk about the origin story. Like, how did you get started with this whole community work kind of space and everything? Like, were you doing this at like a very young age? Were you doing this in high school? Like, what's your character origin story like?
Oh, character origin story. Okay, I like to say this, and I'm not afraid to own it because I think it's very telling of community conditions here in San Diego. But grew up in Bonita, definitely a middle class suburban American kid, second generation Filipino American. My dad immigrated over here to the States in his sophomore year of high school, and my mom was the youngest of 10 and the one of three to be born here in the States from her family. Um, I was so anti-Filipino in my youth. I think growing up, I associated it with the way that religion was imposed on us. And while my parents did take us to cultural events and I did enjoy those, a lot of the Filipino youth that I was surrounded with were disrespectful or cliquey or loud. And I think maybe it was a mixture of me feeling out of place and that I didn't belong. And also that I just didn't want to associate myself with these kids who were just creating this image of Filipinos for the broader community. So in high school, I kind of kept my head down. I went to the events. I understood, their importance, and especially with my family in the San Diego community, their history with organizing, um, that it did play a huge role. But for me personally, I didn't want to step into it and I didn't want to own it. And it wasn't until I was considering schools for college that I was trying to figure out where I was going to go. I was deciding between UCLA and UC Berkeley, and I had asked my parents about it, and they told me that Samahang Filipino up at UCLA was kind of a cool space. They were very low key about it. They told me that it could provide me this opportunity I never had in high school, to getting to know my culture, to being in a student organization that was dedicated to that kind of development and community building. And so that actually was a big factor in me choosing UCLA and even getting involved in the first place. So I came into undergrad kind of anti Filipino, definitely wasn't repping it. Um, I went to my first general meeting and the rest is history. I can't say that it was a perfect relationship from the start or even at the finish, but I found my way into community organizing with them. And that is also a unique product of being the child of my parents. Both of my parents, they met in Samahang. They actually both served as presidents in Samahang, and eventually I would come to serve as president. So the community space there actually has a huge significance for me. It's what helped me find my identity and also start building my skills in community organizing and in leadership. And eventually taking that networking out into the broader community. And it's really set me up with my connections, both locally and nationally now. So that's kind of my origin story. I had a lot of internalized hate, maybe self distrust of Filipinos. And it wasn't until college, with the combined efforts of Samahang and my first Asian American Studies course, Asian Am 20, Contemporary Asian American Societies, that really woke me up. I had this really critical consciousness that came to me as an 18-year-old. I finally felt like I saw myself and saw my context for the first time. So that's really where it was born.
I'm really glad you found your niche with the community and everything. And I feel like that whole thing of like not wanting to be Filipino or like even repping it as like you were saying is I feel like that kind of thing is very common, so to speak, because
Hmm.
granted that wasn't something that like I was exuding, but there were a lot of people that were around me that were like not about that kind of thing or just like saying that they weren't Filipino or just like not really embracing that whole aspect of their life and everything, which is I mean that in itself could be like an own different conversation about like just where they are with their identity and everything. But like, yeah, for me personally, like in terms of like my origin story, sort of similar in the sense that I was kind of just surrounded by a lot of people that just weren't about it, and then I guess transitioning into that, I had more of a naive perspective on it, what it was like to be a Filipino, but I didn't really get much of a perspective on it until I started doing student organizing like you were doing, but this was like back in high school, and then transitioning into college and then transitioning into national. It's like I think like what you were saying, it's like the whole reflectory part of the journey is like so it's so big, especially if like you're looking at it now and it's just like, oh, how did we actually get started? Like where's our foundation coming from and everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a we're gonna throw it back to a common SoCal West Coaster organizer, no history, no self. It is really important to do that uncovering and that reflecting, and at the same time, knowing that it's a process, right? Because as members of the diaspora and as members of the community at large, we are going to be in this kind of perpetual in between space, this liminal space. And so, identity formation, where we place ourselves in the community and in the work, it is so unique and then also so shared. Even in experiencing this in San Diego, it's going to be different in LA. It's going to be different in across the country. It's going to be different within counties of San Diego, and so there's no one size fits all. But it is important to let people know that there are lots of entry points into the community and into this work.
Oh, I'm really happy you used the word liminal because that's such a big factor in a lot of things. Shout out to Barbara Jane Reyes from the Bay Area. She was doing a whole thing on like Panay liminality at the I think it was a conference over up in like Canada and everything, but like yeah, she was talking about how I don't know, we're kind of like in this in between space where we're trying to just navigate and everything. But then everyone at the end of the day, we all have like our own unique way of navigating this whole community organizing space. And I love that even though we all have this kind of individual journey, at the end of the day, it does have some kind of connection. And I really love that.
Hmm. Say that.
So going on to this whole like individual and unique kind of thing, I feel like you're kind of in this unique space where in terms of age, like you're kind of doing this whole you're kind of on the cusp of being a millennial slash Gen Z, like whatever that means. Like what is it like I'm trying to figure it out because there's so many other like definitions I've seen about it, but what exactly is it like someone from Gen Z in terms of years?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's funny you ask, and I know you were there and supported me. I got asked to sit on a panel with Rise San Diego. I was one of their fellows in 2019. An amazing leadership program. If any of you are out here in San Diego, they are committed to changing the faces of leadership and urban leadership in our community. So please check them out. I was asked to sit on a panel for Generation Z voices of leadership, and it kind of confused me a little bit. So I like this idea of a cusp, again, touching back on liminal and touching back on this in betweenness. A lot of like definitions of Gen Z will say anywhere from 1995 on or 96 on, as far as I'm concerned. That year bracket of 95, 96, 97 is what they're looking at. But Generation Z, also called the I generation, we're talking about the generation that was raised with this new technology versus millennials. We've seen, especially for those of us born in the lower half of the cusp, kind of seeing this emergence of technology. That's the main difference. They're talking about Generation Z being this generation that's the most technologically savvy, the most connected, the most knowledgeable, just because of the kinds of situations and the kind of circumstances that they were raised in. So if you look up Gen Z, you're gonna get a ton of different definitions about it, but I think that's generally what they're talking about. Generation Z is the most plugged in as far as social media, as far as news consumption via social media. But we've also seen a ton of activism from the youth of our day. And I would say that they are way more informed than I ever was. Uh, I'm the oldest of five, and the youngest of my siblings is 15. So being able to hold conversations with them and seeing them as actual, in the in the ground Gen Z members has been really, really humbling. The work and the knowledge that these children and youth have been doing has just also been super inspiring. And for me, being on the cusp, I can identify with millennial or Gen Z. It'd be an honor to be a part of either generation. There's important work being done in both. But that's kind of my quick take on it.
It's so interesting to like think about it because we occupy so many spaces where there are people that are Gen Z, millennial, and even like some Gen X and like even earlier generations and as well as cuss and everything. So it's like I think you were just saying it like we're all kind of just working in this whole space together, but everyone just kind of has like their own little quirks that they're like I wouldn't say born into, but they have a lot more access to it, and some things are a little bit more norm to certain generations than there are to others.
Mhm. Mhm. Exactly. And it's kind of cool to see trends because this isn't apply to everybody, of course, but for me, I am the child of folks who are on the cusp of baby boomer and Gen X, and then a lot of Gen Zers might be children of Gen Xers. So there is an intergenerational aspect regardless of the generation that you're born in, who you're being raised by, who's directly influencing you. And so it's really interesting to kind of see that play out as well.
Okay, so since we are on the topic of Gen Z and everything, I know this is like a thing that goes on like a lot, especially from an older generation. Like there's always people saying, "Oh yeah, millennials are like acting like this, Gen Z is acting like this," or even like Gen X is like acting like this from like a lot from people from older generations. And I know you brought this up, and a few other people also brought this up during the Rise panel, but like what is some stigma or what kind of stigma is there for Gen Z people in the community workspace?
I think a lot that comes into play has to do with age and age correlating to lived experiences. And so I think there's a misunderstanding of people across generations and what they face. A lot of comments I've heard about people in Generation Z, and I guess in our generation specifically, our being me included. I'm trying not to other myself from this identity because it is something that people will see from me. Is that we're young and we're hot headed and we're talking about issues that we don't understand tax and we don't understand what's happening in the short term. And why are you advocating for climate change when there's all these X, Y, and Z issues? And I think what we're seeing is a difference in priorities. And that's not a bad thing. The willingness to understand why we have different priorities and what our context is, I think that's what we're missing. That's where the gap is between generations. And so, can we serve as this bridge? For now, it feels kind of stratified in terms of generations, and that's because of the blatant differences that we have in our beliefs and also that we have in our experience. Um, but I think a lot of older generations are starting to recognize, the wealth of knowledge and the value that this generation has, even if they don't have the lived experience. Their experience is still valid and it's still happening in real time, and they're able to communicate that. And I think that's where a lot of pushback is also happening. While we have a lot of vocabulary, means to share our story, to share our thoughts, and then protections to also say what we want to say, it's not something that older generations are necessarily used to. And so that could be causing a lot of friction and challenge. But that's what we've been seeing a lot. Oh, you're young, you don't really know what you're talking about, or of course, you're thinking about these issues, or you've never had to deal with X, Y, and Z. And that seems to be kind of the theme that people are falling under, but it should go deeper than that. And so um, I've been really inspired by intergenerational conversations as of late, asking people to go deeper than just those stigma and just those stereotypes and really go to understand from both sides what's going on. But that's really what we've been kind of surfaced and battling as of late.
I like how you break that up because a lot of judgments are very surface based, at least from what I've seen. So it's like it makes me wonder how people actually do like work. It's like, are you just seeing what's on the surface, or are you actually like talking to people from different generations to see how their perspective is? And I feel like that's something That's very important. And I think one thing that happens a lot is there's a lot of misunderstanding for different generations, especially for the youth and like our generation and everything. It's like, I mean, we do work and everything, but do people really like know what's like going on in our head? What are we seeing? And I think that goes both ways. It's like, what are like these older generations seeing as well? So I feel like that's a big thing that really needs to be addressed in terms of the whole intergenerational kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I
And
guess,
I think, oh,
oh wait,
go
go
ahead.
on. Oh no, go
No, no,
on.
no, all you.
Oh no, I was going on to the next question, but go on.
Oh, yeah, I was just kind of wanted to tag along off that and saying that, there's a lot of things that are required to learn. That's humility and that's vulnerability, a willingness to accept that you don't know everything. And also to accept that what you bring to the table is valuable and what other people bring to the table is valuable. And in this kind of work, the willingness to accept that we as younger folks might not know everything that our older generations are up against, and that for older generations, also accepting that they might not know everything, and that's totally okay. And we really are kind of filling in pieces of this puzzle because of our experiences, our positionality in the world. We're going to need each other to solve these problems, right? Intergenerational issues, traumas, and problems beget intergenerational collaboration and solution building. That's really the only way we're going to get out of this, and it has to be this shared governance across generations, that are really going to help us find and build a community that makes sense for all of us.
I think you touched upon it just like a little bit. Actually, no, I think you touched upon it like right on the dot. But I was gonna ask, what is like for the youth to navigate an elder dominated space? And I think you touched upon the whole like having to manage this whole like intergenerational, I want to say gap in the kind of sense of like understanding like we kind of have to understand things from like both sides and understand like how what I mean, like, what kind of knowledge do we have to acquire? What knowledge can we like give to other people that are like older than us and everything? But like, what is your take on the whole like navigating thing? Because we navigate so many different spaces where there's a lot of elders and a lot of like intergenerational people too. So what's your take on that?
Absolutely. I think, and this work isn't only limited to the Filipino community. It's going to be required in all communities, but especially in our community. It's a lot of expectation management. Um, it's a lot of patience, I think, and compassion for each other. You got to think about our elders, right? And what they faced to come here, to immigrate here, to assimilate or to be accepted here, and the role that they've adopted as our elders to take care of us, to raise us, to see us through success. And so there are lots of pressures that they've placed on themselves, that society has placed on them. And when they're confronted with this situation where it's time to learn again, it's time to accept that maybe what they believed in or what they know isn't the whole picture. There's a whole bunch of layers that we're kind of poking in and encouraging them to kind of explore, but that could be painful. That could be embarrassing, that could be so many things, and I wouldn't know because I'm not them. And so it's really opening up the space and understanding that we're going to have to be just as patient with them as they are with us. And on the flip side, as young folks, making sure that our voices aren't silenced, making sure that we believe in the wealth of knowledge and experience that we bring to the table. It's different, and what we've grown up and lived through is different, but they went through what they did so that we could live different lives. I think that's what's really important for people to know. Even though they have these definitions of success, even though they have these ideas of how it should have gone, it's up to us to define that for ourselves. This is kind of tricky, right? In this sense of collectivism that our culture has, and then the sense of individualism that America has. How are we redefining success and what that looks like? And can we define that together? And so when I think about navigating a space that's dominated by people that are older than me, of course, I have to do my due diligence, do my research. Who are these people? What have they done? Give them credit where credit is due. And then also know that my voice and my presence there is needed and it's important, and I belong. I am supposed to belong in these spaces regardless of my experience, regardless of my accolades, because again, this work is intergenerational and you do need people from all pockets of our community represented here. Um, so yeah, I mean that's really my take. I think I have a special kind of perspective on it since my parents have always connected me to alumni, to older folks who they've been friends with, and I've never been shy to ask for mentorship or to ask for help. I've also never been shy to share my opinion, but that's a privilege, growing up with my family. They've always empowered me to say that, to do that, to take my stance and with community in mind. And so I know that's not everybody's first approach or approach in general to intergenerational organizing, but I truly feel like I have a place here and it was definitely reinforced for my whole life. So that's kind of my take on it.
I like how you're bringing this up and just bringing this back to the whole like I guess our mentors having to learn too. It's like I mean, in terms of pressure, I mean, there's a lot of pressure in terms of like passing things down. I mean, like you have, like, I feel like we're eventually going to be at this point, or even at this point now, where we're going to start having to pass down knowledge to like a younger generation. Like, I don't even know, like, what generation is after Z and everything. Like, there's going to be like I wouldn't say pressure, but there is going to be like there may be people asking us for like advice in the future, and I mean even now we're asking
Mhm.
advice for people like in generations that are much older than us and everything, so it's like it's kind of scary in the sense that you're looking at this leader and then they reach this point where they're also being educated by someone younger than them, and it's like it's kind of scary having to revert back to that whole like student kind of mentality. I mean, it's like it's essentially going back to school. It's like you're kind of like if you're a teacher and you have to go back to school for like I don't know for extra like professional like coursework or whatever, where it's like you essentially changed your role back from being a teacher to being a student, and that whole thing is scary. So like I like what you said about having the whole like patience and everything, because there's a lot of like internal struggle going on, because I get it, like mentors have been there for like forever, and like being a source of knowledge is like being someone that you go to for like advice or knowledge and everything is like such a big, I wouldn't say burden, but it's like it's a big responsibility to have and everything. And I like that you brought this whole thing up of like it needing to be like a two-way thing and everything. And the next point that you brought up, which I really like, was the whole being like millennial or like Gen Z and everything. We have like valid opinions when it comes to like speaking. I mean, we're kind of evolving as like the world's evolving too. So it's like we're giving like a different kind of perspective that a lot of like older generation may not have or may have or whatever. But again, we're still like individuals like doing this whole community organizing game and everything. And like at the end of the day, we do offer something to the community, even though it may not be as apparent to other people as it is to like our generation. And it's like I think that like you said it yourself, like you're owning this whole like you're owning what you have, and I think that's one of the main things that we have to really do as like Gen Z, millennial, or like even Gen Y is like we have to show like that our stance on like what we see is valid, just as how like Gen X or like the baby boomer generation sees it as well too.
Mhm. Mhm. We have to. I mean, you can't. No, you can. I don't want to be here and tell people what to do, but you are part of the story, and you also have the power to put yourself in this context or decide to not associate with it. But at the end of the day, you do create ripples, whether or not you can see them, whether or not people acknowledge them for you. And so I hope folks in our generation, Gen Z, in our generation, millennials, um, see their worth. It the history that we tell about our communities, they're going to continue, but we are also a part of this history. History is being made every day, and we have to make sure that we're acknowledging that and giving power to that as well, because it's not like the movements happen, they're happening this year, and then all of a sudden there's a 50-year gap where there's nothing happening in our community. No, there's people in our generations who are doing this work, and we are and have to own and be responsible for the kind of work that we're doing here.
Yeah, it's like just because it's not the same in terms of like the visual that older people may have envisioned or what the other generations have envisioned as everything, but it's like it's different in the sense that it works for us and it also works for everyone else. Like it's still accomplishing what we want to accomplish. We just need it from like a different perspective, especially now with like you were saying with Gen Z being like the whole like I generation with like iPhones and Androids and smartphones and everything. It's like we have more of an access to do community work or like community organizing online, and that's something that a lot of people that are older than us are still trying to grasp. So it's like we're working with what we have like available, and we're just trying to navigate it how we see fit. But at the end of the day, regardless of whether we're taking it to the streets or we're taking it to like these government buildings and everything, what we're doing is still valid because at least what I mean, we're still continuing some kind of education, we're still continuing some kind of like empowerment or just like protesting, but we're just doing it in a way that just fits us and just works better for us.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, each one teach one, right? That meaning we are all brokers of knowledge. We have so many experiences and things that we can share with folks who don't have those experiences, and that's a learning opportunity. Um, like you said, it's like going back to school, except when we realize that we're all students of life, the learning can never stop, and that also means on our end, the learning that we do and the teaching that we do on behalf of other folks is also going to happen, whether or not we see that. So I like what you brought up about perspective. It is about flipping it around, getting creative. My professor, Rod Labrador, he's actually from here, from Skyline. He teaches at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and he was my professor for UCLA travel study program with Asian American studies. He told us that we might not consider ourselves creatives, but everybody is a creative because it's our responsibility to innovate for a new future, for a better future. Because what's happening right now in the world, I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the things that are happening in this world with Black Lives Matter, with anti indigeneity, oh my gosh, with anti immigration. There's so much happening in this world. And if we don't acknowledge that what's happening right now doesn't work, right? He said we're tasked with the responsibility as creatives to innovate for a future to better serve our community, and that's really what I see our generation, especially Generation Z, as these bridges, these people. And this is actually Nepantla is what I was referring to, this perpetual in between. Nepantleras are these individuals who are set to navigate that state of in betweenness and really serve as the bridges between generations, between causes. I really believe that Generation Z is going to have a huge hand in that. If not, they already have a huge hand in that. And so um, it really is our job to create this world that we know is going to serve us. We know is going to take care of us. And I know that it's been commented that young people are very sensitive, that they have a lot of these like very quote unquote snowflake issues. Um, but really, I think what it is we're finally seeing and creating this ideal world that will take care of us and all of our identities. And so, what's soft and squishy to older generations is really us innovating a future where we know we will belong and be safe. And so that's kind of what came into my mind when you were talking about new perspectives and then learning and lifelong learning. We're really out here creating and co-creating a world where we're going to take care of each other, and that, if that isn't community work, I don't know what is.
I especially love how you brought up Rod because there's a lot of history with that too and everything. Because in terms of like the whole passing down with knowledge and everything, I think Rod is like one of those people that's like kind of ideal in the sense that he's passing down this knowledge so that knowledge will continue to be passed down. And I have a lot of like mad love for him because especially with like one of the books that he wrote with like one of our affiliates Candy Empire Funk, like he was talking about some of that kind of stuff in there. But there's also history
Mhm.
with the fact that Rod is actually like an uncle for one of our former camp members, so it's like there's like history in that too. And I like how this is kind of going full circle in the sense that I think we're also reaching to that point where we're gonna have to start passing down some stuff too, or even passing some stuff up to like older generations. And I like this whole full circle kind of thing.
Mhm. Time is a circle. It really is so cyclical. And we revisit history and we revisit events. They show up in different ways, and it's like these are the recurring themes and lessons. But we're all so connected, even across time and space. And so, yeah, shout out Rod Labrador, P Rod. You rocked my world. You were the first person for that helped me even consider the possibility of graduate school, um, or academic affairs and student affairs. I love that man. He really was there for my whole awakening in my third year of college. And so shout out to P Rod and shout out to Kanaka Maoli people for really providing us that education that woke me up as well.
And I think just going on this whole like shout out thing and everything, like I mean, these are a lot of our mentors that have been doing it for years and everything. And again, I mean, going transitioning to our like advice section in terms of like mentorship, I think we're gonna start transitioning into that point where we're gonna have to start mentoring people because there's a lot of people like coming up in this like community organizing work. So I guess my question is like, what kind of advice do you have for people that are entering like this kind of space for the first time, like for their first like GBM at a like community college or at a university, like or even just starting with like a nonprofit organization? Like, what kind of advice do you have for people that are just starting out?
Oh my goodness. And I have to say this too because starting now, you're starting at the height of a very different time, a very unique time. I'm not going to say unprecedented because the way that our systems have been working, it was only a matter of time before we fell into this pandemic of racism, pandemic of the economy, pandemic of the environment. And so you all are coming into this world at a very interesting time. I want to say that it's never too late to start. Never ever too late to start. I think it's important to get organized and find a sustainable way for you to participate in activism because we've seen that burnout. We've seen how tiring it gets. And so joining a cause or joining a community slash organization that can help you strategize and help you plan for the way that you advocate, I think that's super important. Don't commit to things you don't care about. Um, Time being one of our most precious resources. You can't get it back. Commit yourself to something that you believe in, right? Something that aligns with your values, with your why, something that speaks to the soul. I would say that's one huge piece of advice. And it takes time to find out what your heart calls for, but take that time to reflect, to sit and listen to what it's really calling you to do. Um, Another big thing, we've touched on it, mentorship. Mentorship is huge. Know that there are people in this work that have been doing this work that will offer you knowledge and experience packaged decades of work all in a conversation for you. And it's not to say go out there and take everybody's knowledge and then exploit it. No, it's a gift. It's a gift and you are really being gifted decades of work that you won't really necessarily have to live through in order for you to understand and see these perspectives. So your mentors are out there to help you, and mentorship is a bidirectional thing. Don't think that you're going to be the only one benefiting from that relationship, but it does take work. So when you look for a mentor, set intentions, have an honest conversation with them about where you're at, how you want to grow, and see what you two can put together and work on together. Um, Advice for more community organizing: take it slow. It is definitely a marathon, not a sprint. We're fighting against things that have been here for decades, been here for centuries, been here for maybe millennia, things that we're unearthing that we need to get to the root of. It's buried deep. And know that this work is going to take a lot of people and a lot of time. That's okay. There is a role for you there is a role for you, something that fits your talents, something that fits your needs. There is a place for you in this movement. Um, and just know that you're not in it alone, like not in it on your own. I think that is a huge part, is that no one person has to bear the responsibility or the weight of this work. And so when you enter this, you're entering a space of community, of hopefully of family, and that you can find and count on these people. Last piece, I would say maybe two pieces. Build those genuine relationships with people. There are going to be a lot of hard times, and those relationships will sustain you. So look for those genuine relationships and find the things that make you your authentic self, the things that ground you, and hold those close. Because as the work picks up, as life picks up, it's going to throw you into a lot of situations that will weather you. And so finding those ways to ground yourself back into who you are at your core and to ground yourself back into this earth are really important. So those are some bits of advice that I give for people organizing, especially now, and do it safely, as safely as possible. We still are in a pandemic. COVID-19 is still happening, and despite the county being taken off watch list, I would still highly advise that you take appropriate measures to be safe and to be healthy. So that's what I'm really thinking of.
Okay, so before I touch on some more things, I'm 100% gonna keep this part in, but there was a bit of a connection loss. But what was the beginning of what were you were saying? I feel like there might have been like something critical that could be used for like the next generation or just people that are like still trying to figure out this whole community organizing thing. Like what was the first thing you said?
The first thing I said, was, um, it's never too late to start organizing. Did you hear that
Oh
in the
yeah, okay.
beginning?
So I think just going off that, like I
Oh,
think there's
hello.
also I mean, with that, there's a lot of like learning and unlearning that a lot of people will have to do with this. And I think you already said it before, but like this whole thing with community organizing or community work in general is like it's a marathon, and you kind of have to trust the process with all of it. Like there's gonna be ups and downs when it comes to doing like community work, so it's not gonna all be like I don't know, like these kind of like smooth times or whatever. Like I mean, there are people that kind of glorify these kinds of things. It's like oh yeah, protests and everything are just like the outcome of like these big events, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and
Mhm.
tears that goes into a lot of the work we do, and at the end of the day, it's like there's a lot of like mental stuff that goes on. There's a lot of emotional and spiritual and physical things that go on with the
Mhm.
work we do, and like I think one thing that I really just want to address, like while you're doing this whole process of community work, is just making sure to take care of yourself too, because this is not easy work. Like we've
Yep.
been doing this for like years now, and it's like even now we're trying to navigate this whole like mental health, mental illness kind of thing, and it's like it's going to be hard on the mind, hard on the body, and everything. So I think the best thing that I personally could offer is remembering to take care of yourself and just making sure to check in with yourself and checking in with the people that's like you're working with, because at the end of the day, if like not everyone's at the same capacity, it's going to be a lot harder on everyone. So it's like make 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 sure to check in with your loved ones while you're doing this kind of work too, because it's again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You got to be able to make sure that you're good to finish strong. That's all. That's all I really got to say with that. Was there anything else you wanted to add to this whole advice section?
Nope, I think that was beautiful. I think just to give a shout out to Alfredo for folks to know, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that you do this with, but in terms of having those check-ins, mental health check-ins, creativity check-ins, Alfredo is somebody who's been very consistent in making sure that I'm good, and even when I'm not good, that I'm being heard and seen. So always, always have those folks that you know are going to be in your corner, that will be standing shoulder to shoulder with you through the storm and through the fights. And I think like they will come. You know, you do attract that kind of energy, and I appreciate you, Alfredo, for always offering that kind of space and that kind of energy with me. So shout out Alfredo for all the good heart work that he does with people.
Wow, insert Hinata fingers right here. If you know what that meme is, you have to look it up. But since you're on that whole like shout out train, I'm like, is there anything you want to shout out, any projects you want to plug, or any social media that you want to plug?
Oh wow. Never really done this before, but if you want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, my at is at Newts with five O's. So that's NOOOOOTS. I don't remember why I have five O's in there, but that's what I am. All views are my own, of course, but they have been heavily influenced. Shout out to Origins. I still give a lot of love to Bonita Vista High School, even though, you know, it wasn't perfect, but I will say that is where I started forming my own sense of identity. Shout out to UCLA Samahang Filipino experience, bar none, giving me some of my very best friends and an organizing experience that I will carry with me, my leadership forever. Shout out to Epic. That was my first taste of national organizing, first taste of national friends, really showing me what commitment to community looks like. And then shout out to UniPro San Diego and UniPro as a national organization. It's a magical space. It's so magical. You all have really, really opened my eyes to what I can do here in this place based organizing. And then, of course, Rise San Diego. Um, you've helped me do the inner work so that I can make sure that I'm not projecting that onto the people that I serve. So much of my leadership journey has been changed because of that experience. And so, much love to all my mentors, especially my parents, Arlie Ricasa and Ed Bagaporo. Definitely would not be in the position that I am without them. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we also are those giants, and many people will be standing on our shoulders. So, here in it, here with community, and yeah, I would say next project's really focusing on UniPro San Diego, especially as I'm starting grad school. I have to take a little step back from the other spaces, but I know that UniPro is something that I want to commit to. So be on the lookout. We are planning to do hopefully virtual programming soon and engaging more of our community on a broader scale. So please go follow our social at UniProSD on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook as well.
Wow, so much love. And I just wanted to return that love too. You've also been there on like my whole community organizing journey in terms of like my mental health and just overall health in general. So again, thank you so much for being like on this week's episode. Everything. Just wanted to show a lot of love again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a cool project that you're doing. I mean, if there's anybody who could do it, continue to tell our stories. I'm glad you are. And that would be one big final piece of advice to all generations is tell your story. You never know who it's going to inspire, who it's going to help wake up. And I think that this is a really important step into, what our community needs for our future organizing. So thank you for telling our stories, Alfredo. It was an honor to be on this podcast with you. And I'm looking forward to seeing everything that you're up to and everything to come.
And that being said, thank y'all for listening to this final episode of season one. It's been amazing. It's been an amazing ride, and happy to have Natalie here on to conclude this final episode. And that being said, yes, thank you again for listening to this episode and for listening and supporting the past season and everything. There will be updates for season two, and there will be a season two, so make sure to stay tuned on Instagram at Pilipinx-American Stories and on Twitter at Pilam Stories. So make sure to just stay tuned on all platforms and everything. There will be projects coming out. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you again for supporting thus far. And we shall see you on season two. Thanks.